All right, hello once again, Jeff Scott of Rankin Technical College. And as part of the Rankin Technical College AWD1000 Web Development Technologies class, I've been going through and creating a series of video presentations based on the PowerPoint slides for one of the textbooks for the class, that being Murock's JavaScript and jQuery 4th edition, as you can see right here. So far, all I've done is Chapter 1, the Introduction to Web Development, which brings us to Chapter 2. And in here, how to include JavaScript in an HTML document, the JavaScript syntax, how to work with data, how to work with expressions, how to work with objects, methods, and properties, and 2 illustrative applications. Again, please remember that we're just starting here. So even though some of the applications that they go through might seem very complex, we'll be going through them more and more with more detail as we go on. So with that said, let's jump into Chapter 2. Whoops. There we go. Get started fast with JavaScript. Again, here are our objectives. And as you can see, a lot of it just has to do with the rules of using JavaScript. And again, as I mentioned, I'm doing my best not to sit and read slides to you. All right, so that said, let's get started. So when you work with JavaScript, it says 2 attributes of the script element. The type attribute that they show right there is not required. The source is required. Now the script tag is almost like an HTML tag in that you must have both a beginning and an ending tag. All right, and then you say source equals and then the name of the associated JavaScript file. This is if you put the JavaScript inside of an external file, kind of like we talked about earlier with having an external CSS file. You can also have JavaScript internal and inline. All right, so here's an inline where we've actually put it right inside. Now this is probably about the worst way of doing it just because of the fact what we're doing is we're interspersing our JavaScript code right in with our HTML, which is not considered to be a good idea. It's not that it's wrong, it's just not considered to be a real good idea. So again, you can have external, you can have embedded JavaScript. And when you look right here, now notice we've also got no script because it is possible for somebody who is using JavaScript to turn JavaScript off on their computer, disable it, so to speak. So as it says right there with a no script tag, if they've got JavaScript turned off, they will instead get an H2 tag that says, to get the most from this website, please enable JavaScript in your browser. All right. So you can see there the difference between JavaScript enabled and JavaScript disabled. All right. And I'm not going to run through how to disable it. You can read that on your own. Chances are, unless you're doing some testing and you're testing a no script tag, probably never would want to disable JavaScript in your browser. Now, very important slide right here. JavaScript is case sensitive. The functions that you will write, the functions that you will call that are built into JavaScript, variables that you will create, etc., they are all case sensitive. Now, the second thing that's in there is true, yet it's false. I hate that when I sound political like that, but it's recommended that each JavaScript statement end with a semicolon. But if you don't do it, typically rather, you'll be fine because it kind of puts an implied semicolon in there. JavaScript generally ignores extra white space within statements. That's unless it's something inside of single or double quotes or a string. And as mentioned there, when you use strict mode, it says there that it disallows certain JavaScript features and coding practices that are considered unsafe. What it does, for lack of better words, is it makes JavaScript more conservative, because typically JavaScript is really liberal in what it allows you to do. Now, when you have their use strict, I don't even do it the way they show it right here. I always put use strict up at the very top of the program. So programs that I write, that's what I put up there. Just use strict. All right. Now, this is the example that we looked at in a previous chapter. Now, to split a statement over 2 lines, sometimes there's absolutely no problem doing it. Other times there is. Now, it says there, don't do it after an identifier of a value or the return keyword, and don't do it after a closing bracket or a parenthesis. So the bottom line is, when you can help it, don't split stuff over a couple lines. Now, what's an identifier? It's something that you as a user create. It might be the name of a method. It might be the name of a variable. As we get into this a little more, it might be the name of a class. But they talk about it here, and they say that they can contain only letters, numbers, the underscore, and the dollar sign. I will tell you, have them only contain letters and numbers if you can help it. And even better than that, have it only contain letters. Then you don't have to worry about this stuff. You do have to worry about case sensitivity. You do have to worry about that you can't use reserved words, etc. All right. So there's some valid ones. I always put everything, I do it like this. The one that's shown right there. And as far as I'm concerned, that one, for lack of better words, is more or less, that one is camel casing, which means you start the first word with lowercase, you put the beginning letter for the next word in uppercase, and you run all the words together. All right. So those are valid, but this is the only way that I'll ever do it, is like this. Some people will do it like this. Instead of using camel casing, we'll use the underscore. As far as other people, this is called camel casing. I've never heard this term. They call it snake casing, but again, use camel casing and you're best off. Use meaningful names for identifiers. There are going to be a few times in here where there might be exceptions to that rule. But although you can create your variables, let's say you were doing a program with height and weight, you could call them H and W. Calling them height and calling them weight would make more sense and make your program much more self-documenting. Be consistent. Again, just use camel casing. Here's the reserved words. So it looks like there's about 63 of them if I count it right. All right. So in other words, I can't create my own variable and call it for, F-O-R, or null, etc. These words have a special meaning to the JavaScript system, and they can only be used in a certain type of context. How about comments? The first example that starts with a slash, forward slash, and then an asterisk, also called slash star, and ends with the star slash, that's a multi-line comment. The next one that you see here, When you put in 2 forward slashes, everything then to the right of that for the rest of the line is a single line comment. Multi-line comment, single line comment, single line comment. All the rest in here are single line comments. They call them block comments. I've always just called them multi-line. The litmus test, so to speak, for whether or not you need a comment is if you have to ask, you probably need one. You can also comment out code. So if something isn't working, you can grab a whole block of code and comment it out using a slash star and a star slash. But as it says, don't use comments unnecessarily. I'll always remember in one of the first classes I taught, I told them, we talked about commenting, and I said, I like a lot of comments. So I had a guy comment on a blank line. He put a comment there that said, this is a blank line. And I circled it and wrote with a red pen, no, it's not. He said, what do you mean? I said, you wrote a comment in it. There was no reason to do that. If you've got a thing in there, and we'll learn different ways of doing this, but if you say like x equals x plus 1, don't put a comment there that says increment x by 1 because it's pretty obvious what you're doing. All right, different things related to JavaScript syntax. Let's go over some of these. A statement basically is something that should end with a semicolon. White space is the enter key, the tab key, the space bar, etc. Strict mode we've already talked about. It makes sure that JavaScript is more, I don't know, answerable and does things more the right way. Identifier we talked about, that's something you create. We went over a camel casing and snake casing, and we talked about comments. All right. What you see up on the screen here, these 7 data types are known as the simple or primitive data types. So they're for simple variables, also called elementary variables. So notice that JavaScript, unlike a lot of other languages, has only one kind of number variable. So number, to say something's a number, whether it's a whole number or a number with a decimal place or something else. Strings in JavaScript can be either in double quotes, so you start it and end it with a double quote, or single quotes. You start it and end it with a single quote. Boolean variables are true, false. Symbol are just that. They're symbol variables. Null is something that is unknown. Undefined looks like null, but they're actually different. And big int, which I've never used, is something new in ES 2020. So there's some number examples. Now, it's going to sound almost like I'm talking or walking back what I told you before. You'll notice that those are all numbers, whether they're a whole number or a number with a decimal place in them. That said, when you're trying to go and take what's in a string and convert it to a number, they'll let you do it 2 ways. Parse int for a whole number and parse float for a number with a decimal place in it. Strings, as mentioned, either in double quotes or in single quotes. This is the empty string. Booleans, again, true, false. We talked about that already. They're used in conditional statements. The statement right here, so if let's just grab this one. If we just said let count and then put a semicolon at the end, all right, that is declaring a variable named count. To say let count equal 1, the first part is the declaration, the second part is the initialization. So you can do that as either 1 line or 2 lines, okay? After a variable has been set to a value, you can reset it to another value. JavaScript, as already mentioned, is very liberal in a lot of ways. So I could create a variable up here that said let count equal 1, and if for some reason, if I wanted to later on in the program, so down someplace, I could say let count equal true. All right, I wouldn't do that, but you can do it. Now we'll talk about const more depth and breadth of coverage later. Const stands for constant. So once it's declared, once you declare a primitive variable of type const, you cannot change its value. JavaScript places all variable and constant declarations in memory first. It's known as variable hoisting. When a variable that's declared with the var keyword is hoisted, JavaScript initializes it with a value of undefined. So in other words, if all you say is, if we had just taken this example here and just said, let count, semicolon, count would have a value of undefined. You must give constants a value when you declare them. They talk about the difference between var and let in here. Var is something that used to be used. It's considered poor programming practice to ever use var. You should always be using let. All right, I'm just going to leave it at that for right now. All right, some examples you can take a look at. So you should at least, now you've been shown these, a variable is basically a location in memory whose value can vary. Okay? A constant is a location in memory whose once set cannot vary. We talked about the difference between declaring something and initializing something. The equal sign is known as the assignment operator. If I say let age equal 21, 21 is a literal value. The literal itself is 21. If I say let name equal Jeff, let name equal double quote Jeff, double quote. All right, that's a string literal. Again, if I say let age equal 21, 21 is a numeric literal. We talked about hoisting. Not even sure what temporal dead zone means. So here's the arithmetic operators. Most of them, at least the first 4, you're familiar with. For multiplication, again, we use the asterisk. For division, we use the forward slash, not the backwards. The last 3 might take a little bit of getting used to. The percent sign is the modulus or remainder operator. So if I said to you, what's 17 divided by 5? Back in grade school, we would say that that's equal to 3, remainder 2. The remainder part, the 2, is what you get when you say 17 modulus 5. All right, plus, plus, and minus, minus allow you to either add 1 or subtract 1 from something. And there's a little more to them than that, but we'll get into them as we go on in here. So plus, plus is auto increment, minus, minus is auto decrement. All right, you do pluses and minuses before you do these, and then you do these. So this is the order of precedence. All right, let's check here. All right, we can go a little bit longer here. So here's some examples. And again, hopefully most of the stuff that's in there makes sense. Another example, all right, const equal 200 for the subtotal, 5% for the tax. The tax amount is the subtotal times the tax percent. 200 times 0.5, which is 10. Total is subtotal plus tax total. So 200 plus 10 to give you 210. There are shortcuts. So if I want to say counter equal counter plus 10, I can do that, not a problem. But I can also say counter plus equal 10, which is a shortcut. You can do a plus equal, a minus equal, a times equal, a divide equal, and a modulo equal. All of them will work. As it says here, here's 3 different ways of incrementing a numeric variable. by 1. Three different ways. Counter equals counter plus 1, counter plus equal 1, counter plus plus, or you could even say plus plus counter. All right? All will add 1 to the current value. All right, let's stop right here and we'll pick it up in the next lecture.